Some missions end when the target is caught. Skyfall begins when the mission fails, the world thinks James Bond is dead, and the people who survive have to face what happens when the past comes back for blood. This is not just another assignment about stopping a villain. It is a story about age, loyalty, betrayal, and a man who has spent his life serving a system that may no longer know what to do with him. The film opens in Istanbul with Bond and Eve Moneypenny chasing a mercenary who has stolen a hard drive containing the identities of undercover agents. The pursuit races across rooftops, through crowded streets, and onto a moving train. It is intense from the first second, and it quickly becomes clear that the stolen list is bigger than a simple intelligence loss. If it gets into the wrong hands, agents all over the world could be exposed and killed. Bond closes in on the thief, but the fight becomes desperate on top of the moving train. M, watching the situation remotely from London, makes a brutal call. She orders Moneypenny to take the shot even though Bond and the target are too close together. Moneypenny hesitates, fires, and the bullet hits Bond. He falls from the train into deep water and disappears. The target escapes with the drive, and Bond is presumed dead. What follows is one of the most unusual stretches in any Bond film. In London, M returns to a storm of criticism. The world of intelligence is shifting. Politicians question whether old-style field operations still matter in an age of digital warfare and remote surveillance. Gareth Mallory, the chairman overseeing the inquiry into M leadership, presses hard on the idea that the old system is falling apart. M is under attack from outside and from inside her own institution, and Bond, her most dangerous weapon, is gone. Bond himself is alive, but he does not return right away. He drifts through a half-life of drinking, hiding, and trying not to think about the job. The man who has always seemed built for danger suddenly looks worn out and disconnected, as if without the mission he does not really know who he is. Then everything changes when M headquarters is bombed. An attack tears through the heart of MI6, killing staff and shaking the whole service. Bond sees the news and makes a decision. He comes back. His return is not triumphant. Bond is physically damaged, emotionally frayed, and far from ready. When he walks back into London, he is not greeted like a legend. He is tested. He has to go through medical exams, shooting drills, and psychological evaluation. He struggles with the results. His aim is off. His body is slower. His answers are incomplete. Still, M clears him for duty, partly because she needs him, and partly because she trusts him in a way few others do. Bond follows the trail from the bombing to Shanghai, where he is tracking the assassin hired by the people behind the stolen list. What matters here is not just the action, but the atmosphere. Skyfall constantly surrounds Bond with reflection, shadow, glass, and silence, as if the whole world is asking him who he really is when the mythology drops away. In Shanghai, Bond follows the assassin through a towering glass building lit by shifting neon. The fight is clean, brutal, and almost wordless. Bond kills the man, but the real clue is the symbol of a criminal network and a trail leading further east. That trail brings him to Macau, where the story leans into mystery. Bond enters a floating casino and meets Severine, a woman tied to the enemy he is hunting. She is elegant, frightened, and clearly living inside a prison disguised as luxury. She recognizes Bond for what he is almost immediately, and he recognizes the same thing in her. She is not safe. She belongs to the villain orbit, but only because there is no easy way out. Severine leads Bond toward the man behind everything, a figure named Raul Silva. When he finally enters, the movie shifts again. Silva is not a standard power-hungry villain. He is personal, theatrical, wounded, and deeply obsessed with M. Bond and Severine are taken to Silva Island Base, an abandoned place left to rot after a chemical disaster. The setting feels ghostly and fitting because Silva himself is a ghost of the system that created Bond. He was once an agent under M command in Hong Kong. When he was captured and tortured, M made the cold decision to sacrifice him for the sake of a larger strategic deal. Silva survived, but in the worst possible way. His body was shattered, his loyalty rotted into hatred, and every skill he once used for the service turned into a weapon against it. Silva tests Bond immediately. He talks, provokes, performs, and keeps trying to strip away Bond's professional mask. But unlike many Bond villains, Silva is not truly interested in world domination. His target is M. Everything he does, from stealing the list to bombing headquarters, is designed to humiliate her, isolate her, and force her to feel the consequences of the choice she made years ago. severing becomes part of that cruelty. Silva kills her casually after using her as part of his display, which tells Bond and the audience everything about how far his rage has curdled. Bond tries to shoot Silva and fails, but help arrives from the most unexpected place. Q, the new quartermaster, has planted a tracking device on Bond, allowing MI6 to locate the island. Q represents the new generation, young, brilliant, and totally at home in a world of code instead of field combat. He and Bond do not trust each other at first. Bond sees him as an arrogant technician. Q sees Bond as a relic with a gun. But Skyfall uses that tension well, because the film is constantly asking whether the old and the new can survive in the same service. Silva is brought back to London in custody, and for a moment it looks like Bond has won. But Silva planned for capture. His imprisonment is not a defeat, it is a step in a larger strategy. He hacks Q's system, times everything perfectly, and escapes through the underground tunnels of London while Bond chases him through a city that is now as dangerous as any battlefield. Silva's attack is aimed straight at him during a public inquiry. He wants to kill her not just physically but symbolically in front of the state she served. Bond reaches the hearing in time to disrupt the attack, but the threat is no longer containable inside London. M is alive, but Silva will keep coming. So Bond makes a choice that becomes the emotional center of the film. Instead of taking him to a safe official bunker, he takes her off the grid completely. He brings her to Skyfall, the old estate where he grew up in Scotland. This is the first time the film truly opens the door to Bond past. Until this point, he has always felt almost mythic, a figure built from performance rather than biography. Skyfall changes that. The estate is remote, half-abandoned, and tied to old grief. The caretaker, Kincaid, still lives there and still remembers Bond as the orphaned boy who became something harder. At Skyfall, Bond, M, and Kincaid prepare for siege. There is no army waiting to save them, no line of agents, no high-tech rescue team. They strip the plan down to old basics, guns, traps, and the landscape itself. It feels almost primitive compared to the digital warfare that has driven the rest of the plot, and that is the point. Bond is pulling Silva away from the world of networks and back into mud, stone, and fire. If the modern service cannot protect M, then Bond will do it his way. The attack on Skyfall is one of the strongest action sequences in the series because it is personal, desperate, and physical. Silva arrives with men, helicopters, and overwhelming force. Bond fights through waves of attackers using the house itself as a weapon. Windows shatter, fire spreads, and the old estate is torn apart room by room. Kincaid proves unexpectedly fierce. M, wounded and exhausted, still refuses to become passive. The whole battle feels like the collapse of a world. Bond eventually blows the house, forcing Silva to regroup, and escapes with M into the chapel grounds beyond the estate. By now, the film has stripped away almost every layer of the usual Bond glamour. What is left is a son and a mother figure, a killer and his target, all moving through darkness toward a last confrontation that feels as much emotional as physical. Silva reaches the chapel and finally stands face to face with M in the place Bond tried hardest to protect. He is heartbreak twisted into vengeance. He wants him to understand his pain and to die with him if possible, as if mutual destruction could somehow finish the wound. Bond arrives in the last instant and kills Silva with a knife, ending the threat. But the victory is incomplete. M has already been mortally wounded during the escape, and there is nothing Bond can do to stop what follows. M dies beside him in the chapel, and Skyfall quietly makes that the true climax of the story. Bond has saved the service, stopped the villain, and survived the battle, but he could not save the person who mattered most. Their relationship was never simple. It was professional, manipulative, loyal, cold, warm, and deeply complicated. She used him, she trusted him, he resented her, he returned for her anyway. That mixture is what gives the ending its weight. When she dies, Bond loses not just a superior officer, but the one person who understood the strange shape of his life better than anyone else. Afterward, London feels changed. The smoke clears, the dead are honored, and the service resets itself once again. Gareth Mallory becomes the new M, and the office arrangement suddenly looks familiar in a way that suggests the old order has not vanished so much as renewed itself in another form. Eve Moneypenny, having left fieldwork after shooting Bond, now takes her place as secretary, a quiet bridge between the shaken past and the restored present. Bond walks back into the office not as a triumphant action hero, but as a man who has lost, endured, and chosen to continue anyway. That is what makes Skyfall different from a standard spy adventure. It is not really about whether Bond can defeat the villain. Of course he can eventually. The real question is what Bond is when the illusion of invincibility falls away. The movie answers by showing a man who is aging, wounded, and psychologically scarred, but still driven by duty so deeply that it becomes identity. He does not return because the system deserves him. He returns because without the mission, he does not know how to exist. Skyfall also uses Silva brilliantly as a dark reflection of Bond. Both men were shaped by M, both were used in service of larger interests. Both survived because they were willing to become instruments. The difference is that Bond keeps serving while Silva turns his pain into annihilation. In another version of the story, Silva could have been what Bond became. That is why their conflict feels so personal. By the end, Skyfall becomes a film about legacy. It asks whether old institutions still matter, whether old warriors still matter, and whether loyalty survives once innocence is gone. Bond answers in the only way he knows how, by staying. Not because the job is clean, not because the people in charge are perfect, but because when everything else burns away, service is the last shape his life can still hold. And when he takes his place again at the new M office, Skyfall lands on its final truth. James Bond is not a relic because the world changed around him. He is the man who keeps walking back into the fire no matter how much it costs.